Welcome to the Depth Dive. This week, we are throwing you right into the diplomatic pressure cooker.
We really are.
The Russia-Ukraine conflict has entered this intensely high-stakes phase. And it's not because of a big battlefield breakthrough.
No, it's because of a massive, urgent push for peace. A push that's so fast and, frankly, so contentious that it's starting to fracture the Western alliance itself.
It feels like an extremely fragile moment.
It is. The urgency is. You can feel it. We've seen top U.S. officials, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff down in Florida.
Right, holding emergency talks with Ukrainian officials. I saw Defense Minister Rustem Umerov was there.
Exactly. They're trying to hammer out some kind of framework for a negotiated deal.
And while they're calling those talks productive, the paradox is just staggering. The war itself, it hasn't stopped for a minute.
Not at all.
Our sources are confirming Russian missile and drone attacks are still hitting infrastructure all across Ukraine. We're talking Kiev, Vyshhorod, Kharkiv, while the diplomats are meeting.
And that tension, that's what defines this moment. The rush for diplomacy versus the reality of ongoing aggression. The timing here is just critical.
You've got the U.S. political calendar heating up. The brutal European winter is on the way.
And just general war fatigue. You can see it setting in across the West.
Okay, let's unpack this. Here's where it gets really interesting. Our mission today is to give you a shortcut to understanding the biggest risks. We're going to unpack why this specific U.S.-led push for peace has caused such a deep division in NATO.
And what key, and I mean genuinely dangerous provisions are in this draft proposal.
We'll also get into what this moment means for the global energy market and for, the incredible resilience of the Ukrainian people.
I think what you need to understand is that this negotiation, it's not just about a ceasefire, it's about drawing lines.
Lines that either prevent or enable the next war.
Precisely. And a lot of our allies believe the lines being drawn right now are just strategically unsound.
Okay, so let's start with that political risk, the fragmentation of the alliance.
It's all centered on these talks. The recent ones in Hallandale Beach, Florida. Secretary Rubio came out and said, much work remains.
Which is classic diplomat speak.
It is. But the real deadline, the one everyone's watching, is December 2nd. That's when Special Envoy Witkoff is scheduled to meet directly with Putin in Moscow.
That feels like a very unusual, very sensitive sequence of events.
It is. And the concern, as our sources are identifying, isn't just the fact that they're talking. It's the secretive origin of the plan that's on the table.
Tell us more about that, because this is the detail that really set off alarm bells in European capitals. Right?
Absolutely. The initial draft of this 28-point peace plan, it was reportedly drawn up with input from a Kremlin envoy, a man named Kirill Dmitriev.
Okay.
And crucially, this happened without any initial input or, consultation from key European allies or from Ukraine itself.
Wow. So the message was basically the U.S. and Russia have a framework, now everyone else get on board.
That's how it was perceived. And it caused immediate, severe global controversy. You saw the fracture almost instantly.
I remember the statements from the UK and Germany.
They were so quick. Their defense ministers stressed this non-negotiable principle. There can be no negotiation about Ukraine without Ukraine. But they added something else.
What was that?
They demanded Europe be centrally involved because, and this is the key quote, Europe, not the U.S., will have to live directly with the consequences of any deal.
That's the heart of it, isn't it? The compromise concern, the fear that the U.S. is negotiating on its own political timeline.
And that Europe will be left holding the bag for a bad deal. The alarm is loudest, as you'd expect, on the eastern flank.
Poland, the Baltic states.
Exactly. They see this current U.S. approach as heavily tilted toward Russian demands. They're terrified that a hasty peace just emboldens Moscow.
It rewards the aggression.
And sets the stage for more instability, maybe aimed at their own borders next time. It's not just geopolitical for them, it's existential.
And while all this is happening, Russia is using the talks themselves as a weapon.
A tool of information warfare, absolutely.
How so?
Well, the Kremlin is using its seat at the table to push this false narrative.
That Ukraine is collapsing.
Right. That its political and military stability is gone and the U.S. is desperate for an exit. It's a concerted effort to create uncertainty and panic, hoping the West will just capitulate.
So the risk isn't just a fragile peace, it's the immediate fracturing of the very unity that sustained Ukraine this whole time.
If NATO is talking past itself, that's already a victory for Moscow.
Okay, so if the political risk is fragmentation, the military risk sounds even more immediate.
It's pure systemic vulnerability, and it's written right into the text of the proposed deal.
Let's get into these dangerous provisions. You said there were three that are the most contentious. What's the first one?
The first is a demand that Ukraine has to enshrine in its constitution a ban on ever joining NATO.
That's a diplomatic time bomb.
It is. It's a massive legal and political problem. Ukraine's current constitution actually mandates the irreversibility of the Euro-Atlantic course.
So they'd have to amend their own constitution.
And they can't. Under their current laws, the constitution cannot be amended while martial law is in effect. Russia knows this. They're demanding a constitutional impossibility to create a permanent internal crisis for Kiev.
Unbelievable. Okay, what's the second point?
Military scale.
Right.
The draft plan demands that Ukraine accept a force limit of 600,000 personnel.
Which sounds like a lot, but what's the catch?
The catch is that Russian forces, right next door, would remain completely unrestrained. No limits on troops, equipment, anything. It locks Ukraine into a permanent structural disadvantage.
So it basically guarantees a future military advantage to the aggressor.
Yes. And the third provision is maybe the most shocking from an international law perspective.
What is it?
The proposal includes a blanket amnesty for all military personnel for any crimes they have committed.
Any crime?
Any crimes. It's a deliberate attempt to just sidestep the International Criminal Court. If this stands, it sets a chilling global precedent that military aggression can just be politically absolved.
When I hear these concessions, I can't help but think about the Minsk Accords.
The ghost in the room.
Exactly. Why is that failure so foundational to the opposition to this deal?
Because the critical lesson from Minsk is that Moscow treats negotiations not as a path to peace, but as the continuation of war by other means.
Right.
Minsk failed because it had no verifiable security guarantees. Russia claimed it was just a mediator while it was actively funneling troops and equipment into the Donbass. It created a frozen conflict that became the launch pad for the full-scale invasion.
So if a ceasefire is signed now without ironclad guarantees,
history tells us what happens next. And it brings us directly to what experts are calling the 12-month threat.
The 12-month threat, what is that?
The assessment is that a deal like this would give Russia about 12 months, just 1 year, to pause, rearm, and reconstitute its forces. They're not planning for peace, they're planning for the next war.
Do we have any hard evidence of that kind of forward planning?
We do. Internal planning documents from the Russian tank manufacturer, Uralvagonzavod.
Okay.
They show plans to increase T-90 tank production by 80% by 2028.
80%.
That's not maintenance. That's a massive industrial commitment to military expansion. They are preparing for a renewed conflict.
Which puts the response from the Nordic and Baltic states into really sharp focus. They're not waiting around.
Not at all. They see the, let's call it policy volatility coming from the U.S. So they've launched a decisive regional counteraction, a joint $500 million security initiative for Ukraine.
What's it called?
They're calling it PURL, the Peace and Resilience Through Logistics Initiative. It's a self-organized measure to bypass political delays and ensure support for Kyiv continues no matter what happens in Washington. They're taking security into their own hands.
This volatility is clearly spilling over into global finance too. Let's pivot to the economic dilemma, because the funding for Ukraine seems tied up in this huge legal crisis over frozen Russian assets.
A huge crisis is right. We're talking about $183 billion, and about 2/3 of that is held in one place. Belgium's Euroclear financial institution.
It's a real financial catch-22, isn't it? The EU wants to use the money for Ukraine, but it's hitting a wall.
A wall of international law. The Belgian Prime Minister, Bart De Wever, has been very clear about this. He's criticized the EU plan because legally, you can't just seize the principle of sovereign assets.
It violates international law.
And he warns it could damage the credibility of the euro as a reserve currency. If governments think their assets can just be seized, they'll move their money, it could cause massive financial instability.
So until that legal deadlock is resolved, large-scale EU funding for Ukraine is basically blocked.
It's a legal hostage situation, yes.
It is.
And on top of that, there's a huge strategic risk looming. A temptation.
Russian natural gas.
The energy trap. It's maybe the biggest long-term risk for Europe. If a peace deal leads to sanctions being lifted, cheap Russian gas could flood back into the market.
And after all the billions spent on diversification.
Exactly. Europe spent a fortune on LNG terminals and new pipelines to break that dependency. If they rush back to cheap Russian gas, Moscow immediately regains all that political and economic leverage it used to have. The EU consensus would fracture overnight.
It's a major test of resolve versus foresight, and the ripples are even hitting countries that aren't directly involved.
They are. We saw Kazakhstan lodge a really sharp criticism against Ukraine after drone attacks on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium terminal. That terminal handles about 1% of the world's oil. It shows how this war is hitting everyone.
What about China's role in all this? They're in what's been called a very difficult position.
China is still playing its dual strategy. Publicly, they call for a political settlement, trying to seem neutral.
But behind the scenes,
Western intelligence says they're quietly providing Moscow with lethal aid, keeping the Russian war economy afloat. And if the U.S. pushes through a Russia-friendly deal with sanctions relief, well, it validates Beijing's whole strategy.
It proves their patience and their alignment with Moscow was the right call.
And shows them that Western unity can be exhausting. Meanwhile, of course, China and India are still the main buyers for discounted Russian crude, which is what's funding the whole war effort.
We've covered the military, political, and economic angles, but we need to talk about the psychological element here.
Yes, because that's where you find the true resilience of Ukraine, even as you see war fatigue taking hold in the West.
The latest data on Ukrainian refugees in Europe, it tells a really surprising story.
The findings are just striking, despite everything. The vast majority, we're talking less than 10%, want to permanently settle abroad.
So what's the number who plan to go back?
Nearly 60%. They explicitly say they plan to return home when it is safe.
That's an incredible commitment. What explains that deep psychological determination?
The analysis points to these really strong internal drivers. High confidence in their government and military, a unified national identity, and just genuine optimism about Ukraine's future.
So the fighting doesn't deter them in the long run.
What's interesting is the data shows high conflict intensity reduces the intention to return right now, but it has only a small impact on the long-term plan to go home.
Yeah.
They're not rejecting their country, they're just waiting out the danger.
That mental resilience is profound, but it's balanced against the reality in host countries across Europe. Refugee fatigue.
That's the nuance we can't ignore. Host countries are struggling. Housing shortages, strained budgets, rising anti-immigrant sentiment.
We've seen protests.
Right. Anti-government protests in the Czech Republic, for example, fueled partly by the cost and strain of long-term refugee support.
So even with the resilience of the Ukrainian people, Europe's ability to sustain them is being tested, which just adds another layer of pressure to the whole diplomatic situation.
The humanitarian clock is ticking right alongside the military one.
So what does this all mean? Our deep dive seems to confirm that this is not a moment for, celebration of potential peace. It's a critical turning point where a bad deal could actually enable the next war.
I think the fundamental takeaway is this conflict between short-term political expediency, the desire for a quick win, and the absolute necessity of verifiable long-term security.
If the deal rewards aggression, it just sets the stage for more conflict.
A costlier conflict next time, yes.
So the crucial moments to watch are happening right now. You need to keep an eye on the outcome of that Witkoff-Putin meeting on December 2nd.
That's going to set the immediate direction. And then in Europe, watch the EU summit on December 18th and 19th. They have to decide what to do about those frozen Russian assets.
The whole thing feels like a test of the alliance's ability to resist the temptation of a quick, easy fix.
It is, because the rush for a ceasefire is fighting against the crippling legal complexities of global finance and this very clear military ambition of Russia.
Which raises the final provocative thought for you to consider. If these negotiations result in a peace that is legally flawed, militarily advantageous to Russia, and financially destabilizing to the West, have we, in the search for a quick de-escalation, inadvertently traded a painful stalemate for a short, unstable truce?
And if we have, what's left to concede next time?